Hi everybody, Jane here, and I'm coming to you today with my April 2021 wrap-up. So April was actually an interesting reading month. I got a lot of reading done. Some of the books that I finished were ones I'd already previously started in other months, and it was just taking me a while, so there were some that I was just finishing reading. I also did something new, which was let the library choose my TBR, which I think I'm going to do again. It was definitely a mixed bag, but I am glad I did it, and it was fun. It was a fun thing, and I got to read a variety of interesting books. So yeah, we're going to get into that in just a second. I just wanted to remind you, if you enjoy the video, please hit like. If you're new here, please hit subscribe. Also, my social media is below if you'd like to connect with me, and I'm an author of romance novels. Those are linked below as well. So let's get on to the wrap-up of the books that I did read in April, or in some case that I tried to read and failed. I actually had two of those this month that I started and just could not get into and DNF'd. So I'm going to start with those. And the first one was one that the library chose for me, and that was Sacre Bleu. This book is about friends of Vincent van Gogh who have heard that he has died by apparent suicide, but they don't believe that. They believe there's more to it. And this book, it wasn't a bad book, it just wasn't a book for me. So this book, I think, felt very smart. Like, I hate to say that because I consider myself an intelligent person, but it's felt smart in a way that I didn't feel like I had the background to be reading this. I didn't know enough about art. I didn't feel like enough things were explained. And it's also supposed to be comedy, and I just wasn't having fun. I didn't find the characters that we had funny, and it just wasn't hitting me right. So I didn't get super far into this. I got probably 50 pages before I realized that this just wasn't going to be something that I was going to enjoy. I was struggling to even understand what was happening, and yeah, just not having a good time. So this was, of all the books that the library chose for me, the biggest miss. But that's okay. We'll give the librarians another chance. And I definitely understood why they chose it for me. Things that I put on my list of things that I liked was books about creativity, artists, writers, actresses, musicians, and then also mysteries, and also things that were funny. So like, that should have ticked all my boxes. It just, the book itself wasn't working for me. The next book that ended up not working for me was one I chose for myself. So certainly the library is not the only one who can choose books that are not working for me. And that was The Lost Years by Mary Higgins Clark. This book is about, there is a murder of a man who potentially had some documents that the church would have liked. He believed he had letters written in the hands of Christ, which would be a huge thing to have. And he is murdered, and initially it is suspected that his wife killed him. His wife is struggling with Alzheimer's disease. She was found with the gun and blood and just a lot of things that point to the wife. But this manuscript that people believed he had, or that he had told other people he had, that was the writing of Christ, nobody can find it. So we mostly are following this man's daughter, who of course is devastated. Her father's been killed, isn't sure if her mother is innocent, and wants the truth. It sounds like a really incredible, interesting book. And I don't know why it wasn't working for me, but I got about halfway through, and it's not a very long book, and I wasn't interested. I didn't care. And I think part of that for me may have been, we were getting glimpses of like the bad guy and what the bad guy was doing, and so I felt like I knew maybe a little too much. There wasn't as much thriller stuff going on as I would have liked, and I was just kind of feeling bored. I didn't care if they found the killer. I didn't like any of the characters enough to be concerned about it, and the documents were kind of a little less exciting than I would have liked. They weren't anything, like, it's cool, letters written by Christ, but nothing earth-shattering, not like Da Vinci Code type stuff. So this was the other book that I DNF'd. I have read Mary Higgins Clark before, and she's somebody whose books I generally enjoy. They're typically 3 stars, maybe I think a 4-star in there somewhere. She's not a favorite author, but I do enjoy her work. This particular book just fell flat for me. So on to the books that I did actually finish this month. Let's start with the ones that I had already started previously. The first one is a graphic novel that I started last month for March Mystery Madness and didn't quite finish, and that is Clue. This is a graphic novel that kind of follows the board game, but not exactly. It just references it. But a group of people are in a house, murders start, we wonder what's going on. I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5. It was a little hard to rate because the mystery itself I didn't care about, even a little. And it was kind of like, I don't want to say it was dumb. I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy the mystery part of it, but there were so many other fun things about this book that I couldn't give it less than a 4. So even though the mystery itself didn't work for me, there is a butler who is always breaking the fourth wall, and I loved him. I loved the references in this to the movie Clue. So if you've seen the movie Clue, they'll say these really like corny, goofy things, and you're like, oh, they're referencing the movie. And I loved it, the movie with Tim Curry. I loved that movie when I was younger, so I loved all the little references in here. And then I think the thing that really was fun, the best thing in this, is the ending. Not the ending of the mystery, but some stuff happens at the very ending of this that was so fun and so brilliant. And like, I guess it's kind of predictable and been done before, but I was just tickled pink. I absolutely loved the way this ended, and I loved all the breaking of the fourth wall that was happening. So 4 out of 5, so fun. The next book I finished, I started in February. This is another graphic novel. And I'll be honest, I didn't have as good a time with this one. And that is The Boys, Volume 1. And I don't know if I'm going to continue with this graphic novel series. Like, I enjoy the TV show, and I'm up to date on the TV show. But I'm just not loving the graphic novel the way I love the TV show. So this is a world where there are superheroes, and the boys are kind of trying to sort of help keep the superheroes in check. Like the TV show, we start off with Huey, who is out romantically with his girlfriend when his girlfriend is killed by a superhero. He is then recruited by Butcher, who is somebody who does not like superheroes and is trying to work to keep them in check, along with his other group of people. He has 3 other people working with him: Mother's Milk, the Frenchman, and the girl. I don't remember what her name is in the show. I don't know that they mention her name in this, but she is a little bit, she's crazy. She's a crazy killer. And I think I'm gonna probably do a video a little more in depth on this, but at the end of the day, I think this doesn't have quite the charm that the show does. The show, I feel like, knows it's satirical and doesn't take itself too seriously, and there's a lot of really gross stuff in it, but it's kind of gross in that like scary movie, date movie type way. You know those old shows that they did in the 90s, early 2000s that were like spoofs of things that were just so out there. I feel like the TV show does a lot of that, and this one takes itself kind of seriously, but is also pretty graphic and disgusting in a lot of ways, and the whole tone just didn't quite work for me. There also is not very much focus on the Seven, who are kind of the big superhero group in the TV show. And I wasn't having as good of a time. It took me a really long time to get through it, and I just don't know if I'm going to continue. The other book that was a carryover was Stephen King's It. And I ended up giving that a 3 out of 5. Oh, I gave the boys a 3 out of 5 too, if I didn't say that. So I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5. And I think, let's start with what it is about. It is about a group of friends who are called back to their hometown, and they don't really remember their hometown or why they're called back. But as they get back, there are some memories that start appearing, and it turns out their hometown is occupied by a monster, and when they were kids, they fought this monster and made a pact that if the monster ever came back, they would get together and fight it again. And this is another one that I probably will make a more detailed video on, but basically, I enjoy Stephen King's ideas. He is brilliant, and there are times that I really, really love what he's trying to do. But his writing is a little hard for me. It's definitely one that I have to listen to an audiobook because his books are so long. He takes, I felt like, a very meandering route to get where he is. And also, and this is just a me thing, there is a lot of stuff in his books that sometimes the content could be, it just seems so extreme, and it's not always necessary. Sometimes I feel like things are put in for shock value. And one example of this is, especially listening to the audiobook, there was a ton of use of the N-word. And I was so tired of getting the N-word screamed in my ear. I cannot even tell you. And there are other things. There's a couple really gross scenes, which it's a horror book. I guess that's fine. But it didn't, to me, add to the horror. It was just like an ew. And there's also a lot of kind of sexual content that's, for me, was a little bit uncomfortable in places. Some of it was fine. Some of it I knew was coming, and some of it was just kind of borderline. I wasn't sure how comfortable I felt with it, particularly when it involved memories from their childhood and them being in situations when they were underage that were a little complicated. So I do still plan to read more Stephen King, because I would tell you generally, if you say, do you like Stephen King, that I'm like, he's hit or miss for me. But I can only name one book by Stephen King that I know was a miss for me, and that was Blaze, which was written under one of his other names. So I think I do like King's stories. I just struggle sometimes with his writing style. So yeah, those were the carryovers from last month. Now on to the books that I read this month. So all but one of them were on the list that the librarians chose for me, so that was fun. And like I said, this was kind of all over the place. There were some that I really loved, some that I did not. The one that I loved the most, and I knew I would, was Slightly Wicked by Mary Balogh. So this is a historical romance by an author I already love, so that was not a hard sell for me. You have a character named Judith who is going to live with her aunt and uncle. Her family has become impoverished recently, and she's going to go live as a poor relation with this aunt and uncle. As she is traveling to stay there, there is a carriage accident, and she becomes stranded and is rescued by a duke. Some fun, smutty stuff happens, and then they go their separate ways, only to discover that he is a neighbor of her aunt and uncle and is supposed to be courting her cousin. So it was such a fun read. I gave it a 4 out of 5. I really enjoy Mary Balogh. I really enjoyed this. I think I've read a couple of the other books in the series, but it's been a long time, because when they were talking about the Duke's brothers and sisters, I was like, wait a second, I think I've heard of them before, and I think I kind of remember their stories a little bit. So I think this is a series I've already at some point started. I really had a good time. But again, with Mary Balogh, I totally expected to have a good time, so that was not a shock. The next one I read from, again, the library's pick was Heartstopper. And this is a mystery thriller, I would say. I am not always good at labeling stuff. I would say this is a thriller because from the start, we are reading the diary of the killer. So there have been girls abducted whose bodies are turning up, and people are wondering what is happening. And we do get the perspective of the killer, we get the perspective of several townspeople. This was fine. I gave it a 3 out of 5. There are a lot of good conversations in this about bodies and body image. There was also some gross things about body and body image that bothered me. There is a character who has had plastic surgery, and there's a lot of commentary on boobs, her boobs, everybody else's boobs. Just some things that I didn't enjoy with the storytelling. I didn't really connect with any of the characters, but I did think they chose the appropriate killer. I thought there was a lot of good conversation to go with that. And actually, like, the person who ended up being the killer, when I was getting about halfway through, I thought, well, I hope they make it this person, because if they make it anybody else, that this book is not going to work very well for me. And they did. They made it who I thought it was. And I thought that was definitely a cool twist, a well done thing, even though, again, I saw it coming, or at least I sensed that that is the way this book should go. But I did have an okay time with it. I just, it was fine. It was fine. It wasn't something I loved, but I didn't hate it either. So we'll count that as a moderate win. The next book is a memoir. And I will be really honest, this, I see why they picked it for me. And it should have really checked my buttons, or checked my boxes. But I just kind of had a rough time with it. And that is Floating in a Most Peculiar Way. So, the author of this book, and part of, I think, the reason that I didn't connect with this as much as I could have is there's a lot of background information that I don't really understand because I don't know a lot about African history. The person who wrote this book, he is the son of, I don't know if you'd call him a president or a king or what he was, but he was the founder of a small country that didn't exist for very long. The country was in Africa, it was overthrown pretty quickly, and his father was killed in this uprising. He was taken when he was very young out of Africa and to Jamaica to stay in this place. I don't know, I don't think it was with actual relatives. I think it was with people who took care of children while their parents worked in the United States. And his mom was from Jamaica originally, so she left him in Jamaica and then ultimately brought him to America. And this book is kind of about him trying to figure out who he is and who he wants to be. You have a lot going on. You have him trying to figure out what it means to be the only son of this person who, was king of this country. And, he's meeting people who want that country restored, who want to go back to that, who think that he is kind of his father's son and is going to create this country again and bring greatness to it. He's also trying to figure out how to be a black man from a different country in America. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of discussion about how African Americans who have been here for generations have kind of are kind of different culturally and have a different backstory than people who are from Africa or from Jamaica who migrate. There's a really interesting scene here about how they see themselves as differently when he is called the N-word. And his mother tells him, or maybe it's his aunt, somebody tells him, no, next time somebody tells you or calls you that, you tell them your ancestors were free. They were never slaves. And it's like a whole thing. And didn't know that about the culture. But so he's trying to figure out how to be black in America when he was raised largely in Jamaica and he's from Africa. So, he's this royalty. He's trying to figure out how to be an immigrant in America and what his identity should be as a black man. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5. And it's really hard to judge a memoir because obviously it is somebody's story. And I'm not in any way judging his story. I just have some issues with the way the book was told. I think my first issue was just, I wasn't always sure where we were trying to go. And there were a lot of detours along the way. And I thought we were talking about one thing and then it's like never brought up again. There are also times that I felt kind of confused with things. There were some transitions where I was really lost. Also, because I don't have a background in some of the history involved in this, there was just a lot that didn't fully make sense to me. One other thing I think in this book that was a little bit frustrating for me. This book has a ton of content warnings. There's animal abuse, child physical abuse, child sexual abuse, and we're told that these things happen, but we're not really given context as to why we're being told. I almost wish this book would have done a little more telling and a little less showing in some places, because I didn't really understand why you're showing me the things you're showing me when they don't really seem to affect the rest of the story in any way I can see. What are you trying to tell me by showing me this? To give you an example, there is a scene where our main character is sexually assaulted by somebody his own age. So it's not an adult. It is another child who sexually assaults him at a sleepover. And, we have that. And it is not the first time he's been sexually assaulted in this book. But, he doesn't really look at that. He's like, oh, but then they went to bed and I turned on the TV and I heard this thing that was really important to me. It was this song that had to do with my heritage. And we're off in that direction. And I was like, it felt like, it felt like the sexual assault that just happened should have been more important than what was on the TV. And I just sometimes felt like there was a lot of that kind of thing. So I really struggled with this book. Our memoirist is also a writer, and I was really interested when that was talked about, his, realizing he wanted to be a writer. But again, it was kind of glossed over, like, hey, I realized I want to be a writer, and then basically never talked about again. And I found that infuriating because this has a lot of cool discussions and ideas and things I was interested in learning about. I just didn't feel like I really got it. So that was kind of a disappointment. Again, one of the things that I said I liked was biographies and history, and those are all things that's in that book. That book just didn't quite work for me. So I think the librarians picked something they thought would be to my taste, and that particular book, because of the writing style, just fell flat. The last book the librarians picked for me was a graphic novel, or a graphic, I don't know if you call this a graphic novel because there's not a story. This is more like little cartoons about creativity, the shape of ideas. I had a really hard time reading this, but I decided to give it a 4 out of 5. I didn't feel like this book made me more creative. I don't feel like I felt like it spoke to me about the life of a creative. And it didn't really add anything to that discussion other than making me feel very seen. So I did love that. I did love the reading the comics and relating to them. I think this is the kind of book that if you are friends with a writer or an artist or another creative, that would be a sweet gift on a holiday. Like, this is the kind of book that I would love to be gifted. I would feel very seen. I don't know that I gained anything from reading it other than feeling seen and related to. So I enjoyed this. I enjoyed it because I got it, but I didn't necessarily think it added a lot to discussions on creativity for me. The last book was a book that I chose for myself, and it is a book that I've read books in the series before. And I had kind of stopped reading the series and remembered, like, I liked the series, but I remembered I stopped for a reason. And so when I picked it back up, I was like, wonder if I'll still like this. We'll get there. The Long Paw of the Law. So this follows a female police officer and her dog. And in this particular book, there is a baby dropped at a fire station. The baby's blanket stitched into, I don't really know a lot about like stitching stuff, but stitched somewhere in the fabric in a real discreet place was the words help, or word help. So our police officer and her dog are part of the team. It is a team that is trying to find out who this baby belongs to, who is the mother, and there is a symbol in the stitching that may or may not indicate that the child came from a spiritual group nearby, a cult nearby. I really enjoy so many things about these books, but I think I remember now why I kind of stopped picking them up, and I will probably pick them up in the future. They're not bad. They just are something that I could love so much more. So I enjoy the dog. Best part of the book. The police officer character is okay. I like her. She's a little bit on the young career woman side, so I don't always relate to her as well. I did like her in this book, though, because, you know, she has a little bit of maternal feelings happening because they rescued this baby, and she's very proprietary of the baby and, you know, wants to make sure it's okay. So there's some maternal feelings, and I did like that. She has a relationship, which she's had since the first book, so it's not like there's not a lot of stakes going on in the relationship. There's not a will they, won't they, or anything like that. They're together. They'll probably end up married by the end of the series. Whatever. He's a he's a fireman, she's a police officer. You know, but she's very career oriented. There's not much going on in her personal life. And I think in some ways that, for me, detracts from the story a little, because we're just hanging out with this policewoman and her dog and solving crimes, which would be fine, except that we're also following the criminal's point of view. So we know a lot more than our main character about what is happening. And I think especially in this book, that felt like a real disservice to the book and the storytelling, because there was no thriller element, there was no mystery element. We were following a policewoman and her dog, but we already kind of knew everything there was to know. We knew when she would go look for a clue and the clue had been removed, where the clue was, why the clue had been removed. Like, there were little things that we didn't know, but in the end, this just doesn't have as much sense of mystery as I would have liked. And because I find the main character not somebody I'm super, super drawn to, I like this, but I don't love it. So that ended up being a 3 out of 5 as well. So a solid month as far as quantity. Quality, I just would have liked to have a few more 4 stars, maybe a 5-star, anywhere in that. But hopefully next month is better. I did totally understand why the librarians picked each of the books they picked. So I was excited by that. I think, my tastes are a little bit particular, but they gave me exactly what I said I wanted. So I'm hoping that as we continue to do these library boxes, I continue to find new books that I would never have known about existed and give them a chance. Even if they end up being like Sacre Bleu, where it just ends up not being for me. All right, guys, please tell me about what you read during the month of April. If you've read any of the books that I talked about, tell me what your thoughts are on them. And I will see you next time. This has been Jane. Thanks. Bye.